When did you go into the Army?
Went in 1968. Yeah, it was in the fall of 1968.
The fall of '68, and why? What was behind your decision to join the Army?
Well, I was in between graduation in high school and my future. And a lot of us were just sort of waiting to see if we were going to get drafted. And
Mm.
I didn't really have any career planned. And I was becoming restless. So I just decided to volunteer for the draft.
You volunteer, you go into the Army voluntarily. I mean, did you assume when you did that you probably would end up going to Vietnam?
Well, I wasn't sure what MO I would end up with. The reason I went in was because, I believe what was being put out there. I still believe it was true, but there may have been a lot of other reasons we went over there, was to stop communism from spreading. And
Yeah,
that was happening.
yeah,
So, I bought the line and, I didn't like communism. I learned about it, and what I knew about communism is I didn't like it. And
yeah.
so I decided that was a worthy cause to go. And the other was that I was raised in a time where American patriotism and dedication to God and country was very important. And my
Yeah.
dad served, and he was wounded. My uncle served as a pilot, a bomber pilot in World War II. So, I have a history of, wanting to live up to my family's level.
Sure. So, this is, as you say, the concern is the spread of communism, and this is what we want to do. We want to help South Vietnam stand up on its own as it's under attack from the north, and then you have some internal actors as well in South Vietnam who want that country to unify with the north but become communist. So then does that mean that as you go into the Army, you're thinking that you want to go to Vietnam, that if you go into the Army, if you go into Vietnam, that's okay? I mean, were you kind of itching to get over there and to see what it was all about, or was it more of a I'll just do whatever happens sort of thing?
It was a combination of that, but
Yeah,
yeah, I was expecting to go to Vietnam, especially if you were involved in the draft in any kind of way, whether it was drafted or volunteered for the draft. I was expecting to end up there.
yeah. So let's get there then. When did you arrive in South Vietnam?
I believe it was in 69. I'm not sure of what month. It's in my records, but
Yeah,
it was in 69. It was 6 months after I went in for training.
yeah. And where did your plane land?
Benoit.
Benoit.
Yeah,
So northeast of Saigon there.
right. Just a little bit
Yeah,
northeast of Saigon.
yeah. Were you on one of these commercial flights
Yes.
over? Do you have any recollections of that flight? I'm always interested in.
Well, I think most vets do, that
Yeah,
it's sort of it's a little bit nerve wracking, getting on the plane and,
mm,
especially after the plane is sealed up and the attendants are, taking care of everything. It was somber. And, I wrote in my book that it felt like, especially when we're getting off the plane, like the women attendants, they knew what we were walking into, that some of us may not come back. And if we do, we might be wounded. So, we were all young men at the time, and it just sort of felt like, maybe they wanted to give us a hug, but I certainly felt like I wanted them to hug me.
yeah. So you felt like you could pick that up from them, this
I
feeling
thought
like,
I thought it existed. Yes, I mean, they're
yeah.
women, and they knew what us young American boys were walking into. So yeah.
Did the flight kind of have a life to it? I'm wondering, I imagine you get on the plane and it's a pretty serious thing. You're leaving home for a long time. This isn't a 2-month cruise. This is a year. In your case, it ends up being 14 months because you extend. but you know, at the very least, I'm away from home for a year. Um, and I'm going to a combat zone, and given your job, which we'll hear about in a little bit, you must be pretty certain that I'm actually going to see combat as well. So I'm guessing it's pretty serious at the beginning of the flight. My and so what I'm thinking is, and I'm interested in hearing, you know, what actually is true, that it's pretty serious on the just sort of the vibe on the plane is probably pretty serious. And I'm guessing that it gets more serious the closer you get. Is that right or no?
Well, yeah, it definitely is correct. You know, that we're all going over there and we're all young. You know, we just got out of our teenage years, and yeah, it was apprehensive, nerve-wracking, and so yeah, we didn't know what to expect, and we knew we were once we get out that plane, you know, everything is going to change. Flying over the, you know, after we come in off the ocean, it doesn't take long to get over the land where Benoit was.
Yeah.
You see bomb craters out there, the big green plush carpet, and then, you know, these bomb craters. So
Wow.
yeah, that's pretty impressive. And then as the plane lowers, you start seeing little trails of people with their hats on and their carts and the water buffalo and so forth.
I often ask vets, you know, when it became concrete to them that they're heading into a war zone. You know you're going, but at some point it becomes crystal clear because you've seen something, you've heard something, you've experienced something. Was seeing those bomb craters that moment for you that, oh,
Yeah,
okay,
that's what did it.
this is it?
Bomb craters.
Yeah. What is your memory of your very first interaction with the country? The door of the plane opens up and you make your very first step into South Vietnam. What do you remember first?
Well, I'm sure you heard it hundreds of times that
Yeah.
as soon as you step out the door, you've got the humidity and the heat waiting, and you walk right into it, and it's a shock. And I've never experienced anything like that before. And then the thought comes into your mind, you know, I'm going to have to endure this for a year. So yeah, that was my first experience.
Yeah, and you write in your memoir about the monsoon and the rain that just seems endless and to come down in sheets and all of that. So walk us through the first 24 hours, your very first 24 hours in Vietnam. What do you remember about that?
Well, right off the plane, you know, we had to walk into an area where we all got in lines, and then there's this guy at a desk telling us, you know, well, asking us what is your name, la da 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 da, and then he says, okay, well, you're going to go here and you're going to go there. So I got behind my friend Eric. He was the only one I knew when we flew over there, and hoping that we would end up in the same unit. Well, he got taken to the 7th cab, and right behind him, I step up, and the guy tells me I'm going to the 1st of the 12th cab. So immediately we were separated, but you know, we hung out until the next day. Went and watched a movie, and went to the PX and bought cigarettes.
Mm.
Sort of mingled around. We watched the South Vietnamese that were working there.
Mm.
It was, you know, they didn't acknowledge you. They didn't even know who we were, just another American.
So in Vietnam, your job was to work the M-60 machine gun. So what was involved in that job? What went into that job?
Well, usually an M-60 machine gunner was about the 4th guy on the trail. So you had your point men, sometimes 2 point men, and then in our case, our lieutenant, he was a good guy. He'd be right up there at the point with us, radio man, and then the machine gunner. And then behind him is the gunner's assistant carrying the ammo and so forth. But no, we were there just to give the heavy power. The M16, I mean, it's a good weapon, not as good as the AK-47, but the M60 was the best weapon we had out there in the field, and it was intimidating.
Yeah. you began as the assistant M-60 gunner.
Right.
How much would, let's say you're going out on patrol, and you mention in your memoir, you go, you run down a list of everything that you're carrying. As assistant gunner, you've got all the ammo in addition to everything else that you're carrying. You go out on patrol, it's 95 degrees, humidity is just skyrocketing. How much extra weight are you carrying?
Well, it varied based on how many supplies we used before our next log, which is logistics resupply.
Right.
Yeah, I figured it was, I calced it out on a calculator, listed everything and looked up the weight. And yeah, we were carrying about 85, 90 pounds, which if you've ever picked up a sack of cement and tried to throw it over your shoulders, it's heavy. But we were young, and I don't know how the heck we did it, but we did. It was just got accustomed to it.
Wow.
Crazy. It was crazy.
Yeah. Of your 14 months in South Vietnam, about how much of that time would you say you were out in the field? I mean, you do spend time on the landing zones, you do spend time on a fire support base. How much of that 14 months would you estimate that you were actually out in the field?
Well, before I try to make a conclusion on that, in Company B, there was like, well, not Company B. In our unit, 1st to 12th, there was 4 companies, A, B, C, and D.
Mm.
And we would rotate. So like one company would be on the LZ, in this case, LZ Grant, near the Black Virgin Mountain in Tay Ninh. So you'd always have one company there at least on the landing zone, and the other 3 would be out in the field, and then you'd rotate. And there was like maybe 4 to 5 days on the LZ, maybe up to a week at the most. Didn't last very long. And then we'd have to file out, and in front of the LZ where there was an opening, the helicopters would come in, pick us up, and take us back out to the jungle. I would say that probably being in the field, it's just a guess, I don't want anybody checking me on this, but I'm saying probably 75 to 80% of the time we were in the jungle. And the length of each time would vary also, depending on what was going on out there, if it was a hot zone or not.
Wow.
Sometimes we're longer than others.
Setting aside combat, so let's put those times in the field where firefights happen, let's put those aside, and you're out in the field and you're dealing with everything that's not combat. What was the most difficult thing about being in the field apart from combat?
Well, we had to adjust our lifestyle, everybody had to be quiet, and just the worry, there was a high level of stress, anticipating a firefight, noises, smells,
Gosh.
and things like, we'd have to go out and go to the bathroom, take our little shovel out there, not too far out. You don't go too far out. You get behind a bush, and then you do it and come back in. So, that's not comfortable. And thinking about home, worrying about your family, your girlfriend.
Wow. I mean, what I'm hearing is just altogether months of unbroken, unrelieved stress. I mean, even if there's no combat, because there may be combat.
There was light moments, though.
Yeah.
We tried to break it up. happened mostly, after we would set up a camp, in this case, just a circle of foxholes. And after we got all the foxholes done and the mines set up, we have dinner. So, that was fun time. So we'd open up our little boxes and decide what we want, turkey loaf or
Right.
weenies and things like that. And then we'd get together in our little groups and trade off and break bread together.
All the different sea ration options. I don't remember if you say this specifically in your memoir. I'm gathering from discussions with vets that the ham and lima beans were the least popular of all the options. Is that right?
This is a true thing, yes.
Yeah.
Didn't like them at all.
So would you then just hand those off? You mentioned being on the LZ on the fire support base. I don't know if this is the case where you were, but often, you hear stories of Vietnamese kids, especially boys, who will kind of, come hang around. If that was the case, are they the ones who would get these sea rations of ham and lima beans, or what did
that
you
would
do?
happen at times.
Yeah.
Grunts were put in different locations. Some were put close to villages, others were deep on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, where there were no villages. But there were a couple of times when we skirted villages in our patrols and stopped and rest at the edge of a tree line. And across the field, there was a village.
Yeah.
And yeah, the kids and the sandwich lady and the boom boom girl would come out and spend time with us.
Yeah.
And yeah, they would get these rations that most of them were looking for candy. So
yeah.
and we had candy bars. So
and cigarettes. I think you mentioned that the Vietnamese kids are smoking cigarettes as well.
Yeah. We had cigarettes. I think they're in little 4-packs.
Yeah.
Winston or Marlboro, something like that.
Yeah. I'm waiting to hear the story of the Vietnamese civilian who's given a can of ham and lima beans, and they taste it, and even they throw it down in disgust. I haven't heard that story yet.
But I'm sure it happened.
You mentioned just having to always be aware of what's going on. What was that sound? And in your memoir, you refer to sort of how your senses get heightened, and I think you refer even to being able to smell the enemy, and I think that's literal. I've heard that enough from vets who say that you, and I think the assumption is that they could probably smell you guys too. So you can smell the enemy. Heightened senses. And you say that this became for you a permanent life condition, this sense of just being on high alert, very sharpened senses. So in a combat zone, of course, that makes perfect sense. But you say that this, these heightened senses that you pick up in a combat zone becomes kind of a permanent life condition. What did you mean by that?
Well, when you come home and you realize that you're not in a combat zone anymore, but still you're, looking around and you're jumpy and, you see things differently in crowds. You bring it home with you, but it's been over 50 years since I was in Vietnam, and it doesn't go away, but it decreases, but it doesn't go away.
So how does it still show up for you? Just some examples that I've heard. A guy who served with artillery says that sometimes he'll be driving down the highway and he'll just be looking out at the country, and he'll just almost unconsciously in his mind, he'll think, oh, that would be a good place to set up some artillery. Another guy who was a helicopter pilot, he's driving down the highway, and he says that sometimes in his mind, he's no longer in his car, but he's back in his helo flying through these valleys. Is it that sort of thing that you're referring to, or certain smells, certain sounds that will just almost in an unconscious way kind of bring you back for a little while?
Yeah, definitely. There's things that trigger it. And in my case, few times I would drive by a helicopter place for military helicopters, and the Apaches would rise up and fly right over me. And of course, the Apaches were an offspring of the Cobra,
Mm.
and I saw a lot of Cobra action. And so,
The
yeah,
Cobra gunships.
yeah.
One of the things I often hear is that the most dangerous time for a soldier in Vietnam was at the beginning of his tour in Vietnam and at the end of his tour in Vietnam, because at the beginning he doesn't know anything, and at the end he's sort of psychologically checking out and wanting to go home. I've heard that. You referred to this FNG, this blankety blank new guy, as the term was, who showed up. So I just want to read this, and then I'm interested in hearing whatever follow-up thoughts you have. You say the next day a firefight ensued, and within minutes, one of the FNGs, one of the new guys, was dead. After the firefight was over, I walked over to see him lying on his back with bullet wounds in his torso. He was lifeless and painted with his own blood. His friends stood over his body weeping. Damn, this is messed up, I thought to myself. We lifted his body onto a plastic poncho, then covered him. And then you say, sadly, I never knew his name, which is something I often also hear from vets. Some of these new guys would come and be gone so quickly they wouldn't even have any idea who they were. I'm interested, as I read that to you, as you heard you want your own words read back to you, what went through your mind? What response do you have to that?
They came out, I believe, the day before during a log resupply, and that's when the FNGs would come out. Not all the time, but there was two guys that came out on that log, and the next day we engaged in the firefight, and by the time it was over, one of them was dead, and the other one, I guess he knew him pretty well. Yeah, he stood over his body and he was weeping. So yeah, in my mind it was like, my goodness, how does this happen? I've been out here for months, and this poor guy comes out the next day, he's gone. It just, that kind of stuff boggles your mind, and you really can't reconcile it.
Mm. Well, that gets me then to another passage here that really struck me. Again, we're right after a firefight, or at least you're reflecting on what happens there in combat. You say, as for me, I was still alive. Should I thank God that I cheated death again? Did fate allow me to duck the attention of the death angel? And even just the choice of words there is interesting. I thank God, the idea that maybe there's a power that was looking out for me. But then the next line, you use the word fate, sort of this idea that, it's kind of up in the air, and some other power or some other, the choice is made some other way. You say, should I be happy that this grim reaper? So we've got God, I'm not trying to analyze your book as, in a literary thing, but we've got God, we've got fate, we've got the grim reaper. What's interesting about that to me, just to reflect on that, is it seems like even with the choice of these different words, you're trying to work at making sense of this. Like, who is in charge of this? Who's deciding? Why does the FNG go and I don't? That's my interpretation. I'm interested in hearing what you think. But even just the choice of these different words, is it God? Is it fate? Is it the Grim Reaper? Should I be happy that this Grim Reaper attached its claws to these two brothers instead of me? And then you say, this was too much for me to make sense of. So you have two fellow soldiers who've been lost in battle. You've made it through again. So should I be happy that the Grim Reaper took them instead of me? And I've heard vets say, I'll say, well, you're in this situation, the soldier who's right next to you, the Marine who's right next to you, he was taken and you weren't. And sometimes they'll say, you know, I hate to say it, but the very first thing that went through my mind is that I'm glad it wasn't me. You know, you hear that. But then you say, I just needed to accept it and move on. And we all did. There's just so much in that passage that a person could work with. You know, using these different terms. And again, my interpretation is you're trying to deal with, you know, who's making the decisions about who makes it and who doesn't. And then, I mean, how old are you at this time? 19, 20?
20.
20. And you've got this very strong relationship with these soldiers. You're looking out for that soldier's looking out for you. But now 2 of my buddies are gone and I've just got to move on, you know. So I'm just interested in hearing what thoughts you have. I mean, what do you think about that idea? God, fate, Grim Reaper, and just I think 2 lines. Does that, even perhaps in an unconscious way, is that you trying to wrestle with this idea of trying to make sense of this?
Oh yeah, I just, you know, I don't know how many other guys with the same experience struggled with this internally, but I know I did. Yeah, I was trying to make sense of it, you know, figure out why them, not me, and is it just luck, timing? You go in circles with it, you know. Honestly, I do believe in God, and I've accepted Christ as my Lord and Savior. Trying to figure this kind of stuff out and making your own judgment on, you know, did God do this? And, you know, why does he do that? No, you know, that's for us to understand at a different time.
Mm.
And that's why I say at the end, you know, I just have to accept it and move on. I'm not in charge. And that much I know.
Was that was a conscious decision you made sometime after the war? Because I imagine as the years go by, you know, as I read that, see, to me, those are words. To you, that's an actual memory. You're there, and I'm sure you're able to bring to your mind's eye that moment when you're standing there thinking this to yourself. So was there a point at some time after the war where you just said, look, there's not an answer available to me right now why I got to get out of Vietnam and they didn't? And so you just kind of have, there really is no other alternative other than to just accept that that's what happened, to believe that eventually I'll get an answer to this, but probably not in this world. Was there that moment that you had to do that?
Yes, I finally accepted that I don't know all things, I don't understand all things, and I'm not in charge. I didn't create myself, and I don't keep the world going.
In this case, you write about an enemy. And so here's what you write. You say, the enemy, like us, did not want to leave their dead and wounded behind. But in this case, there's an NVA who you find. We went through their pockets looking for maps and information. This was a no-brainer. The lieutenant pulled the wallet from one of the victims, looked inside, and then handed it to me. So the lieutenant hands you the wallet. Then you say, I opened this man's personal life. So interesting, you referred to him now, not as enemy, not as NVA, but this man. And inside were photos of him and his wife and kids all smiling and looking happy. Unbeknownst to his loved ones, their lives had changed forever. I imagined the devastation his family would experience once they received the news. You say, I would have been calloused if I didn't feel some sympathy. To me, he was a gook when alive. When I looked at him lying lifeless on the trail, with his blood soaking into the soil, he became a man. That's pretty powerful. I mean, that's powerful stuff. Again, for me, those are words on a page. For you, that's a real thing that you can bring right to your mind's eye and you can see it. I mean, let's put you back in that scene. To the extent possible, given the limitations of language, and even putting it in this way makes it feel trite. But I mean, what's going through your mind? What sensations are going through your body? What's going on with you as you're witnessing this?
Well, we just gone up the trail, not knowing if they were still out there behind the bush, but eventually we realized that whoever was on the trail, besides these two dead ones on the laying down, they had retreated. They ran back up. So once we got up to them, yeah, the adrenaline was still pumping. Are they still out there? But then we relaxed enough, and yeah, the LT picked the wallet up, and we're looking at the bodies, and just, he opens it up and hands it to me, and I pull the photos out of his wife and kids, and it was like, wow, put him in a whole different light for me, realizing how much he is like us, and yeah, it became, a few minutes before, he was a gook trying to kill me, and now he's a dead man with a wife and kids. So yeah, all those things did go through my mind, and maybe I'm more sensitive than some guys. There's a number of guys out there, kill the goose, treating them like they were animals, but like I was perfectly able to kill gooks, but at least after they're dead, that's when I sort of disarmed myself about making it personal.
Mm. Did that experience, of course, you continue to be a reliable soldier, a reliable comrade to the other soldiers. Does that experience change you in any way at the time, sort of how you're thinking about the war? Does the fighting become, if it ever had a personal element to it, like you're saying, these other guys just, get them, does it become more of, well, this is the job I have, and so I'm going to do the job? Did that experience sort of change your perspective, your outlook, your approach at all? Although it doesn't have any impact on your skill as a fighter, on your sense of duty.
You're right. It didn't make me any less likely to, engage in a firefight. And
Yeah.
But it made me realize how we're sort of like pawns and on both sides, and he's doing what he was either forced to do or wanted to do for his country, but ultimately he was just the bottom man on the totem pole, carrying out the wishes and desires of his government, and in so many cases he was no different than me.
The Viet Cong didn't wear uniforms, and of course the Viet Cong are among the local population. You mentioned, and you describe in your memoir, local Vietnamese coming out, selling various things. I imagine at the LZ, I imagine at the FSB, at the fire support base, I don't know this, but I'm guessing you would have, Vietnamese come out. Did you feel that it was possible to trust any of the Vietnamese civilians you interacted with? Was there always a sense that, this kid seems nice, but maybe he's gathering intelligence for the Viet Cong? What were your own interactions like with Vietnamese civilians in terms of feeling that you could trust them, feeling that they were on the side of the anti-communists, if they even cared about that at all?
Well, that's something I got in tune with early, whenever there was an occasion to be around the South Vietnamese, yeah, can I trust them there? So yeah, I was cautious, and apprehensive. But like when they would come out from a village to sell their goods, yeah, before they even got really close, I mean, you watch them and watch their body language and their, like the kids, if they're laughing and playing and, all excited doing that, they're probably okay. I dealt with very few VC, but mostly NBA. And there was, going back, there was one time when I went with two other guys in a Jeep to the local village, Phuc Bin, and the guy that worked at the base knew of Papa San, who was dealing opium behind the village stores.
Right.
Yeah, it was like a movie. We're driving in there and the kids are just running up to the Jeep, and the Vietnamese music is playing, the fish odors are going through the village, and we're checking out the Vietnamese women.
Yeah.
So anyway, that
And
we were definitely exposed then. That's when I became very apprehensive.
yeah, all you describe it, all the while you're thinking, I probably shouldn't be doing this.
Yes.
And then the opium consumption begins, right? And
Well, this guy that took us there, like I said, he worked at the base, and
yeah,
Dennis and myself,
yeah,
just sort of came along. So he takes us, once we get out of the Jeep, we're going down the little walkway, and he goes in between these buildings, and we start walking into the, so God, it was like the ghetto, straw huts, and we just like going into this different world behind the facade of buildings. And so yeah, he goes right into this, I think it was like a bamboo and straw hut.
yeah,
The little Papa San's there, just skin and bones, dark skin and bones, and his eyes are all yellow. And so he's got this mat bed, and he had us lay down on it, and this big old water pipe, and he puts this black gooey stuff in there, heats it up. I tell you, that was one of the stupidest things I did over there, was engage in that. But by the time we got out of there and paid for our opium, we're walking back, and we're stoned out of our minds. And that's when I became really, really scared. I told the guys, I said, let's get in the Jeep and get back.
yeah.
By then I suspected everybody wanted to kill me.
Golly. We mentioned at the outset of, of course, the Vietnam conflict is related to the Cold War and to stopping the spread of communism. And communism does, of course, eventually take over South Vietnam, takes over Cambodia, takes over Laos, threatens Thailand. So there is a problem. I mean, communism is spreading. That is a problem. Once you're in Vietnam, you're experiencing combat. You're experiencing things like, what you just described. And we're later in the war now, where I think these kinds of things that you described are becoming more common, when we're in the latter 69, 70, 71. Let's say 6 months into your tour, 8 months into your tour, was the war still in your mind about communism? So, I'm not asking about what the generals are thinking, what the thinking is at the Pentagon, what the president is thinking, but in your mind, as a young adult who's been in Vietnam now for 6, 8 months, experiencing all of these things, is the war still about communism? Or imagine yourself, there at the LZ, and one of your buddies walks up to you and says, Jack, what the heck is all of this about? What are we doing here? How do you think you might have responded?
Well, at that point, and I reveal it in the book, my mind is questioning a lot of things. More of how they're operating the war, how the people behind the big oak desks are making their decisions, going through this cycle of, telling the American people the war is going well, and then getting news back that, it's not going well. So they send more troops over there, and this cycle keeps going. So I'm thinking, it's not working the way they're doing it. because we're not taking ground and holding it. They fight over hills till a bunch of people are dead. Then the Americans walk away and the Gooks come back and take over that territory. So it wasn't like World War II when we took over area, it just pushed the Germans back. So anyway, by the time I got home, yeah, my perspective has changed. It wasn't that I wasn't as fervent about stopping communism, but my mind was more focused on when's this going to end? How's it going to end? Why are they not just going up into North Vietnam and ending this, doing whatever it takes like we did in World War II, if they believe in the war, if they believe in the goal. That's what we did in World War II. No matter what it took, had to employ it. But our leaders weren't doing that. It was a controlled war, limited war, a war where they go in and bomb Hanoi until, we think their arm is twisted enough to where they say, we give. But then they do the peace talks and so forth. So yeah, it became a frustrating experience watching it after I came home. But the ultimate experience was in 1975 when I was watching television, and the Americans decided to pull out Saigon. And of course, that was a fiasco. And all the helicopters are flying back and forth, bringing people on the ships, pushing helicopters off the aircraft carrier. And I remember I'm standing up looking at the TV, realizing this is it. This is the end. This is how it's going to end. And I'm just shaking my head. And as I'm writing the book and recording that event, I'm thinking, you know what? I wasn't the only one shaking their head and watching TV. How many thousands of American veterans that went over there and did what they did and paid what they paid. So they're watching, this is the way it's going to end.
The end.
That was an experience.
Was your feeling that, or more toward, we never should have been there in the first place? Or was your feeling more toward, we had a reason to be there, and the people of South Vietnam, if they were going to have a chance, they couldn't have succeeded without us. But so, okay, we were there, but we should have prosecuted the war in a very different thing. So which of those two views was closest to yours? We never should have been there at all, or we should have prosecuted the thing in a very different way from how we prosecuted it?
Well, sort of in between. If they weren't going to go in and prosecute the war to win, which we had the power to do, I believe, then no, we shouldn't have gone in. You never engage in a war you don't plan on giving it everything you have to win it. But we didn't. Our leaders didn't.
Did you feel, often veterans will talk about rules of engagement, where they felt like in some respects their hands were tied because of the rules, which of course the Viet Cong don't have any rules, but the US forces have rules, Australians, other allies we have. Did you ever feel that the rules of engagement prevented you and the soldiers you were with from doing the job as well as you could have?
I remember, I guess maybe it was about mid-tour. I'm not sure when those orders came down, but it was during my tour. And when it finally got to the field, to our lieutenant, and he shared it with us about what you just explained, I was mad and humored.
What did he say? What was the rule that you had to
Well, I can't verbatim say, he just said, you don't fire unless you get fired upon, and that kind of crap, especially when you're near a village. And we all just looked at each other and and that ain't gonna happen. And we ignored it.
Yeah,
I did, and all my other buddies did. And we're not gonna do that.
wait to get shot at before you
Before you engage
engage somebody that is an adversary. You mentioned the interactions with the Vietnamese and the understandable reluctance to feel that you can trust them. At the very least, you want to be wary and, see what's going on. Did you find yourself feeling then, um, or as you've looked back, have you found yourself feeling that a lot of these Vietnamese villagers who are rice farmers, they've got their water buffalo, that a lot of them were really stuck between two fires, the Viet Cong and the NVA on one side, and the US and its allies on the other side, and that did you have that sense of these, a lot of these poor villagers are just stuck in between these two fires?
Oh, absolutely. I had empathy towards them. And I later on, when I started researching for the book to make sure I was accurate in my statements, I realized that the North had sent out squads, I forget what their names were, they had a specific name, to
Mm,
go into the South Vietnamese villages and wreak hell on the villagers to make sure that they don't conspire with the Americans or help the Americans, and they would wipe out villages, kill people to do that. And yeah, I feel a lot of empathy towards the people that had to go through that.
mm,
They're just poor people out there wading around in the rice fields, with their pants rolled up and the water buffalo. Yeah, they're just poor people trying to survive, and they did get caught in between.
yeah. The normal soldier's tour is 12 months, but you were in Vietnam for 14, so you extended for a couple months. Why did you decide to do that?
Well, what happens is when you go in, you're the new guy. You got the longest tour just in the jungle, and when you go out, normally somebody gets back in the helicopter because he spent his time out in the field and a rear job opened up because somebody went home. And my rear job, there was a point where I became the oldest grunt out there, and it was my turn to secure a rear job. I don't know. I think I was out there like maybe 10 months or so. At any rate, my time came. They flew the helicopter out and unloaded supplies, and I shook hands with everybody and got in the helicopter, and they flew me back to LZ Buttons, which is close to the Cambodian border. And I secured a job as laundryman.
Yeah. Mhm,
That was an experience. But it was a heavily fortified base.
mhm,
So, we were subjected to rocket attacks. But
yeah.
then I got the notice that, the clerk wanted to speak with me and asked me if I'd like to extend for 2 months. So when I go home, I can just process out and not have to spend another 6 months in the States.
In the
So I
army in this
rolled the dice and said, you know what? I can survive this another 2 months on this base. And so that's what I did. I extended an additional 2 months.
The goal being to then, when you come back to the States, then you process out immediately rather than another 6 months in uniform in the
Right.
States. Yeah. Um, so when you came back to the States, then how long was it before you processed out?
Oh, as soon as we got to, I don't know, it was San Jose or San Francisco, yeah, we were bused to a processing center, Army processing center. We were out within 1 or 2 days. I mean,
Holy cow.
yeah, they did a medical exams on us and gave us a nice uniform, our medals and our papers, and put us on a plane and sent us home.
So what you're describing, I mean, is kind of mind-boggling to me. That I don't know if you remember specifically what day of the week you got home, but it sounds like what you're describing is I could be in Vietnam on Monday and I'm a civilian back in the States on Thursday. That's what it sounds
Yes,
like to me.
absolutely. It was just within a few days.
When you look back on that, I mean, just hearing that, it just seems kind of crazy to me that that's what happened. I've heard this so many times from Vietnam vets that this is what happened. It just seems crazy that that was the reality.
Yeah, it was crazy. I didn't really uh, put it together or realize how intense it was until I was older and started reflecting on it. And yeah, when you're going through it, you know, you don't know what the hell's going on. And what do I do now? You know, jeez.
Mm,
And yeah, what am I supposed to do now? And I remember going home and knocking on the door and going inside the house and seeing my dad sitting in the chair, and he could hardly look at me, and just I guess he was nervous. Went in and shook hands and sat down on the sofa, and the conversation was so uncomfortable. Like, well, what do we talk about? And, you know, they didn't ask me questions about the war, and you know, it just didn't seem like I was just coming home from college. It was just a very uncomfortable experience the first night with my family.
you ask a veteran, you know, when were you in Vietnam? And sometimes the veteran will say last night, meaning, you know, in my dreams, decades later. Um, how about for you? I mean, did there come a place where you, of course, you do carry on with your life, you have a career and jobs and that. But did you ever get to a place where you felt at ease again back in the civilian world?
I want to give you an honest answer. It was a progression that I really never paid attention to. I
Mm,
mean, the effects of Vietnam lasted for years after I came home. I mean, it affected my first marriage. It didn't last. And when I look back on it, you know, my restlessness and my I was so driven back then. I started a masonry construction business and so forth, but I was always just pushing, driving. Just it was insane. But and I've heard that a lot of Vietnam vets experience the same thing. They just, you know, threw everything into work or their occupation.
mm.
But no, Vietnam is always going to be a part of us, part of me. But my daughter once said, you know, Vietnam does not define you. I said, but it defines part of me.